My daughter told me I should just sign the house over and go live in that shack. I didn't flinch. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it's 63 years old, sitting in my own kitchen while she and her husband discussed my future like I was furniture they hadn't decided where to put. I understood something I had been avoiding for years. I had raised a family by being steady, and they had mistaken steady for weak. Dad doesn't really need all this space, my daughter Christine said, gesturing around the room as if the walls themselves were wasted on me. Her husband, Derek, nodded, arms crossed, leaning against the counter like he owned it. It's practical, Glenn. 4 bedrooms for one person? That's just sitting on equity. Equity. That was Derek's favorite word. He had been a mortgage broker for 9 years and talked about everything. Houses, cars, relationships, in terms of return on investment. My wife, Barbara, passed 14 months earlier. Ovarian cancer. She fought it the way she did everything. Quietly, completely, without asking anyone to watch. After the funeral, Christine started calling more often. Not to grieve. To strategize. You could sell this place and clear 6, maybe 700,000, Derek said. Market's peaking. You wait another year, you lose leverage. Leverage. There was that word again. I sipped my coffee slowly. The mug had a small chip on the rim. Barbara had kept it because it was the first one we bought together at a flea market in Asheville, 1986. I wasn't sentimental about objects, but I understood what they carried. And where would I go, I asked. Christine exchanged a glance with Derek. Well, she said carefully, there's Grandpa's cabin. Grandpa's cabin. My father, Harold Caldwell, had died 3 years before Barbara. Lung disease, slow and grinding. He had been a land surveyor for the county for 41 years. Walked property lines in rain, heat, and frozen mud. Never earned more than $52,000 in a single year, but he owned land. Small parcels, quiet titles, deeds he filed himself at the county recorder's office because he didn't trust attorneys to read what they signed. When he died, the estate was modest. His house in town went to my sister, Mary Ann. I received 74 acres of wooded land outside Harlan, Kentucky, and a small cabin sitting near the eastern ridge. No road access. No plumbing. A hand pump well and a wood stove. Mary Ann had laughed when the will was read. Dad gave you the Boy Scout camp, she said. At least my place has a roof that doesn't leak. Christine had never visited the cabin. She called it the shack and treated it like a punchline. Derek had once estimated its value at maybe $30,000, if someone wants to hunt on it. Now they wanted me to live there. It's peaceful, Christine offered, reading my silence as hesitation. You've always liked quiet. I set down the mug. I do like quiet, I said. But I don't like being managed. Her expression shifted, not guilt, inconvenience. Nobody's managing you, Dad. We're trying to help. Help with what? With the next chapter, Derek said smoothly. Retirement's expensive. Healthcare, maintenance, property taxes. You're sitting on a house that could fund all of it, and instead you're paying to heat empty bedrooms. I looked at him. Derek had never asked me what I did for a living before I retired. He knew I worked for the county, some kind of records thing, he once said at Thanksgiving. But he never asked further. If he had, he might have understood that I spent 38 years in the county assessor's office reviewing land classifications, easement filings, and mineral rights documentation. I read deeds the way some people read novels, slowly, carefully, and always looking for what the author left between the lines. But Derek didn't ask, and I didn't volunteer. I'll think about it, I said. Christine smiled. Don't think too long. Derek says rates are shifting. They left at noon. I stood at the kitchen window and watched their SUV pull out of the driveway. The dogwood Barbara, planted the year Christine was born, had begun to bloom, white petals against dark bark. She always said dogwoods bloom when they're ready, not when you want them to. That afternoon I drove to Harlan. The road to the cabin hadn't improved. Gravel turned to dirt, dirt turned to ruts. My truck handled it the way it always did, slowly, without complaint. The trees thickened as I climbed. Poplar, oak, hickory. Understory tangled with rhododendron. The air changed at elevation. Cooler, denser. It smelled like cold stone and green wood. The cabin sat in a small clearing near a rock outcrop. One room, 400 square feet. Tin roof. Plank walls. My father had milled himself from timber he cut on the property. The porch sagged on the south side, but the frame was sound. I had checked it the previous fall, the way Dad taught me. Look at the sill plate first, then the joists, then the rafters. Structure tells you everything if you ask the right questions. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Dust. Stillness. A single shelf of books my father had left behind. Field guides mostly. Trees. Rocks. Birds. One binder, thick with plastic sleeves, labeled in his careful block handwriting. Parcel records. Caldwell. I had seen it before. I had never opened it with urgency. Now I did. The binder contained decades of documentation, survey plats, tax receipts, correspondence with the county recorder, and near the back, a section I had overlooked, or rather, had no reason to examine closely until now. A signed agreement dated 1997 between Harold R. Caldwell and the U.S. Department of Energy, Appalachian Field Office. Subject: access and monitoring rights for subsurface geological survey stations, parcels 18C through 22F, Harlan County. I read it twice. My father had granted the federal government access to underground monitoring stations on his land, not mining, not drilling. Monitoring, seismic activity, groundwater flow, geological stability data used for regional infrastructure planning. The agreement included annual compensation, modest at first, $12,000 in 1997. But the contract included escalation clauses tied to CPI and a renewal provision every 10 years. I turned the page. The renewal had been exercised in 2007. Compensation had risen to $28,000 annually. Another renewal in 2017, $47,000. I sat very still. My father had never mentioned this. Not once. He paid his taxes, drove his truck, ate his dinners, and kept this in a binder on a shelf in a cabin nobody visited. The next page was a deposit ledger. Payments had been routed to an escrow account at a regional bank in Lexington. The balance, as of the last entry my father had recorded by hand, was $411,000. I closed the binder and looked out the window. Late afternoon light came through the trees and columns. A woodpecker worked somewhere nearby, steady and rhythmic. My father had spent 4 decades walking land. He didn't speculate, he didn't flip, he surveyed, recorded, and filed. He trusted documentation over conversation. I understood now why he gave me the land instead of the house in town. Mary Ann would have sold it. Christine and Derek would have appraised it at $30,000 and moved on. Dad gave it to the person who would eventually open the binder. The next morning, I drove to Lexington. The bank was a small regional institution, the kind with carpet that hadn't been replaced since 2004, and a lobby that smelled like photocopier toner. A woman named Patricia handled the state accounts. Caldwell, she repeated, typing carefully. Harold R. Yes. She studied the screen. This account has been in dormant status pending beneficiary confirmation. We sent notices. To what address? The property address on file. She paused. A cabin in Harlan County. Of course. My father had routed all correspondence to the cabin. Not to my house. Not to Mary Ann's. To the land itself. What's the current balance? I asked. She hesitated, then turned the screen slightly. $487,312.14. I didn't react. Numbers are just numbers until they're verified. And the federal payments, are they still active? Yes, sir. Quarterly deposits. The most recent was 3 weeks ago. $12,400. I asked for copies of all account statements and the original contract on file. Patricia printed 46 pages and placed them in a manila envelope. As I left, she said, Your father was very organized. He was a surveyor, I said. He measured things. Back at the cabin that evening, I spread the documents across the kitchen table. A table my father had built from a single slab of walnut. I cross-referenced the contract terms with current federal land use regulations. The monitoring stations were part of a network the DOE maintained across central Appalachia. Decommissioning them would require environmental remediation and relocation. Expensive, disruptive, and politically undesirable. The contract was functionally permanent. I calculated forward. At current escalation rates, annual payments would exceed $60,000 within 5 years. Over a 20-year horizon, my remaining actuarial expectancy, give or take, the land would generate over $1.2 million in lease income alone. And that assumed no buyout offer, which, based on comparable federal easement acquisitions I had reviewed during my career, could range from $800,000 to $1.5 million for a site this well established. The cabin was cold. I lit the wood stove and sat in my father's chair. The fire crackled. Outside, the mountain was silent, in the way only mountains are. Not empty, but holding. I didn't call Christine. I didn't call Marianne. I sat with the information the way my father would have. Let it settle. Verify before you act. Measure twice. 2 weeks passed. I spent them at the cabin. I repaired the porch. I cleared brush from the access road. I met with the Harlan County recorder and confirmed the easement was properly filed and current. I contacted the DOE field office and spoke with a program manager named Raymond Sykes. "Mr. Misger, Caldwell," he said carefully when I identified myself. "We've been trying to reach the estate representative for some time. You've reached him. We'd like to discuss the monitoring agreement, specifically options for extended renewal or potential acquisition of permanent subsurface access rights. I'm listening. Our engineers have recommended upgrading the monitoring infrastructure on your parcel. It's become a primary node in our seismic network. The current agreement allows access, but not permanent installation of upgraded equipment." "What are you proposing?" "A permanent easement acquisition. We will compensate the landowner for full subsurface rights." "At what valuation?" He paused. "Based on preliminary assessment, we're looking at approximately $1.1 million. I let the numbers sit. I'll need to review the terms, of course. After I hung up, I poured coffee and stood on the repaired porch. The valley below was green and deep. A red-tailed hawk circled over the far ridge. My father had watched this same view for decades. He had walked every foot of this land with a transit and a chain. He knew what was beneath it, not because he went looking for treasure, but because he paid attention to what was already documented. Christine called that evening. "Dad, Derek ran the numbers on the house. If we list by June, we could close by August. He has a buyer already interested." "Derek has a buyer for my house?" "A client. He's pre-approved. It would be a clean transaction." I set down my coffee. "Christine, I need to ask you something." "Okay. When was the last time you visited this cabin?" Silence. "I don't know. Maybe when I was 12. Do you know what Grandpa did for a living?" "He worked for the county." "Doing what?" Another pause. "Something with maps." "He was a land surveyor for 41 years. He measured boundaries, recorded easements, and filed documentation that determined who owned what and what rights attached to it." "Okay. He gave me this land for a reason?" "Dad, it's 70 acres of trees and a cabin without plumbing." Derek said. "Derek doesn't know what he's looking at." Her tone sharpened. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not selling the house, and I'm not moving." The call ended shortly after. Now I was shouting. Christine didn't shout. She simply went quiet in the way people do when they realize they can't move you and haven't yet decided what to do about it. 3 days later, Marianne called. This was unusual. Marianne and I spoke maybe 4 times a year. Birthdays, holidays, and whenever Christine recruited her. "Glenn, Christine says you're being stubborn about the house." "I'm being clear." "She's worried about you. Alone in that big place." "I'm fine." "And the cabin?" "She says you've been spending time up there." "I have." Marianne hesitated. "Dad left me the house in town. I sold it 2 years ago. Got $160,000. It was fair." "It was. So whatever's on that mountain, it's yours. I'm not contesting anything. I know. But Glenn, Christine, and Derek, they're in over their heads. Derek refinanced their place twice. They're carrying debt. I understood then. This wasn't about my well-being. It was about liquidity. My house was their exit strategy." "That's not my problem to solve," I said. "You sound like Dad." "I'll take that." She laughed softly. He would have said the same thing. We hung up. The mountain air had turned cool. I zipped my jacket and walked the eastern perimeter of the property, following the line my father had surveyed decades ago. Every 30 feet I found his markers, small iron pins, driven into the ground, still solid, still accurate. He had measured this land with precision because he believed boundaries mattered. Not walls, not fences. Boundaries, the legal kind, the kind recorded in ink and filed in triplicate. Near the northeast corner, I found what I was looking for. A small concrete pad, maybe 4 feet square, flush with the ground and partially covered by leaf litter. A steel access cover with a federal property tag. DOE monitoring station name I-7, Harlan Array. I brushed away the leaves and placed my hand on the cover. It was faintly warm. Not from the sun. The ground was shaded. From equipment running beneath it. Constant. Reliable. Like my father. Like me. The following Monday, I drove to Christine's house. She lived in a subdivision outside Lexington. New construction. Open floor plan, granite countertops. The kind of house that looks impressive in photos and sounds hollow when you walk through it. Derek's Audi was in the driveway. A good sign. I wanted them both present. Christine opened the door with a cautious smile. "Dad, come in." Derek was at the kitchen island, laptop open, spreadsheets glowing. He closed it when he saw me, but not before I caught the header. Caldwell Property, projected net. They had already modeled the sale of my house. "Coffee?" Christine offered. "No, thank you." I sat at the dining table and placed the manila envelope in front of me. Christine and Derek exchanged a glance. "I'm not selling the house," I said. "I've told you that. But I want you to understand why." Derek leaned back. "Len, the market isn't going to..." "Derek." I said it quietly, but with enough weight to stop him. "I'm not here to discuss the market." I opened the envelope and laid out the documents. The 1997 agreement. The renewal filings. The payment ledger. The DOE correspondence. The preliminary buyout offer. Christine picked up the contract first. Her eyes moved across the page without comprehension. Derek reached for the payment ledger. His expression changed. "What is this?" he asked. "It's a federal monitoring easement on the Harlan property. Active since 1997. Renewed twice. Annual payments currently are $49,600. Escrow balance of $487,000 and a pending buyout offer of $1.1 million. The kitchen was very quiet. "That can't be right," Derek said slowly. "It's recorded at the county office, verified by the bank, confirmed by the DOE. Christine looked up. "Dad, why didn't you tell us?" "Because you never asked what was on the land. You called it a shack. You estimated it at $30,000. You wanted to put me there so you could sell my house." Her face reddened. "That's not, it is. And I don't say it to punish you. I say it because you need to hear it." Derek stared at the numbers. I could see him recalculating. Not the land, but me. Reassessing the quiet man he had dismissed as a retired clerk who didn't understand equity. "The cabin sits on 74 acres of surveyed, title land with active federal infrastructure beneath it," I continued. "Your grandfather knew its value. He documented it, filed it, and left it to the one person he trusted to read the paperwork." "Why not Aunt Marianne?" Christine asked quietly. "Because Marianne would have sold it. The same way you wanted to sell my house, quickly, without reading the attachments." Derek closed the laptop fully. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to decline the buyout," I said. "The lease generates reliable income that increases over time. I don't need a lump sum. I need stability." The word sat between us like something solid. "And the house?" Christine asked. "The house is mine. It stays mine. When I die, you'll inherit it along with the Harlan property, but only if the easement is maintained and the lease is honored. I've updated my estate plan accordingly." "You got a lawyer?" Derek asked, surprised. "I've always had a lawyer. You never asked." Christine's eyes were wet. Not dramatically, just the quiet kind of tears that come when you realize you've underestimated someone you were supposed to know best. "Dad, I'm sorry," she said. "I know. I didn't mean..." "You meant it," I said gently. "You just didn't understand what you were looking at." I gathered the documents and placed them back in the envelope. Before I stood, I said one more thing. "Your grandfather walked property lines for 41 years. He earned a modest salary. He drove the same truck for 15 years. People thought he was simple. But he understood something most people don't. Value isn't what's visible, it's what's recorded. I drove home that evening through the long Kentucky twilight. The dogwood in the front yard was in full bloom now, white against the darkening sky. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. Barbara would have liked this. Not the money. She never cared about that. She would have liked that I finally said what I meant, clearly, without raising my voice. The house was quiet when I walked in. 4 bedrooms. Empty, yes, but not wasted. I made dinner. I washed the chip mug and set it back on the shelf. I sat in the living room and opened one of my father's field guides, the one on eastern hardwoods. On the inside cover, in his careful handwriting, he had written a single line: "Measure what matters, file what lasts." I closed the book and listened to the house settle around me. Pipes ticking, boards shifting. The quiet language of a structure that was built to hold. Outside, the mountain was still there. 74 acres of timber in stone and silence. And beneath it, something valuable was running. Steady, monitored, paid for. Because a man who walked property lines for a living had the patience to read what he found, and the wisdom to leave it to someone who would. Derek chased returns. Christine chased solutions. Marianne chased simplicity. I followed documentation. And documentation, in the end, defined what was mine. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the one who reads while others rush, who files while others flip, I'd like to hear from you. Where are you watching from tonight? What would you have done differently? We share stories like this every week, about patience, about quiet ownership, about the things people miss when they only look at the surface. If you want more, subscribe and stay with us. There's always more beneath the ground than anyone expects.